We've already talked about the difference between different colored eggs, pasteurized eggs, and eggs produced by hens fed special diets. There are three more kinds of specialty eggs increasing in popularity called welfare certified, cage-free, and free-range. To understand these terms, it's first necessary to understand how conventional eggs are produced. Most hens are housed in large laying facilities using cage systems called battery cages. The birds are protected from the elements, disease, predators, and accidents, and provided with optimal temperature, humidity, feed, water, laying space, and security. When battery cages were first introduced in the 1930s, they were considered progressive and more humane than earlier methods because hen mortality dramatically decreased and they allowed for larger flocks. Human working conditions are often better at farms that use cages because there's usually less dust and ammonia, and it is possible to automate egg collection. It is also possible to control hens' diet, resulting in a better fed hen that produces higher quality eggs. Hens that live in these cages produce some 95% of the eggs consumed in the U.S. Eggs are laid on the sloping floor of the cage so there is minimal contact between the egg and the hen, which decreases the possibility of bacterial contamination of the egg. Confinement and caging of hens also keeps hens away from their droppings and the pathogens in the droppings, and it makes it possible to dispose of those droppings more easily. The United Egg Producers, a national trade group, has set guidelines for minimal cage floor space. Each white egg hen should have 67 square inches of space, a little more than 8 inches by 8 inches, and each brown egg hen should have 76 square inches of space, a little more than 8 inches by 9 inches. 6 to 10 birds may be housed in each cage, depending on the size of the birds and the size of the cages. UEP estimates that only 20% of egg-laying hens in the U.S. are raised by farmers who do not participate in this voluntary animal welfare program or meet UEP's minimum standards. An independent scientific advisory committee made up of scientists from government agencies, academia, and the American Humane Association developed UEP standards. Egg producers participating in the UEP certified program are audited annually by a third-party organization. You will see the UEP logo on cartons of eggs from producers participating in the program. The American Humane Association offers a similar certification program. Nevertheless, some consumers are very concerned about the welfare of egg-laying hens confined in cages, believing animals should not be confined in close quarters and should be allowed to perform natural behaviors, such as nest site selection. There are several other welfare certification programs for cage-free and free-range hens. Hens living in indoor floor facilities produce cage-free eggs. These hens do not necessarily have access to the outdoors, but may have access to a multi-tiered indoor environment called an aviary. Mortality rates may be higher because the hens tend to peck at each other, causing injury. Cage-free hens are also subject to panic behavior that causes them to pile on top of one another, smothering the hens on the bottom. Hens laying cage-free eggs theoretically are able to walk, spread their wings, and lay their eggs in nest. UEP guidelines for cage-free hens call for at least 1.5 square feet of space per bird, although this can be lowered to 1 square foot depending on the kind of cage and hen. Birds that lay brown eggs, for example, are bigger than birds that lay white eggs. Cage-free on the label of an egg carton does not guarantee third-party auditing and refers only to how the laying hen was housed. Cage-free eggs taste the same and have the same nutritional values as conventional eggs, but cost more because of the production system. Some cage-free eggs are certified humane by a voluntary program called Humane Farm Animal Care. Producers meeting these standards may raise hens in a barn or outdoors, but the birds are not confined in cages and have room to exercise, stretch, and flap their wings. Their diets do not contain animal products, and they have access to perches and nest boxes. Free-range eggs are produced by hens with access to the outdoors, but this does not mean that they are always kept outdoors. They might be kept in a combination of a barn and outdoor pens called verandas or porches. Typically, they are kept inside at night for protection from the elements and predators. There is no consensus on how much land per bird constitutes a range, and there are no set standards for free-range eggs or mandated third-party auditing. Pasture rearing of chickens is a modification from the free-range system. The hens remain on the pasture all the time but are confined in a portable pen that is moved to give birds access to fresh pasture. Often, the names pasture and range are used interchangeably. The Animal Welfare Institute and the Food Alliance offer voluntary programs that certify hens are cage-free with continuous outdoor perching access. The birds must be able to perform natural behaviors such as nesting, perching, and dust bathing. There are requirements for stocking density, perching, space, and nest boxes. Unlike other welfare certification programs, the Animal Welfare Institute program also prohibits a practice called beak clipping. Beak clipping was developed at Ohio State University in the 1930s as a way to reduce feather pecking and cannibalism, all behaviors that increase stress to the laying hens and lead to increased mortality in a flock. You've heard of a pecking order, and the term comes from chicken behavior. More dominant, aggressive hens peck at other hens and keep more timid hens from getting to the feed. A hen starts pecking and pulling at the feathers of other hens, which sometimes leads to serious injuries and cannibalism. There is less feather pecking and cannibalism among hens confined in battery cages, which is one of the reasons the cages became standard in the first place. Hens get equal access to feed, so overall nutrition and egg quality are better. The highest rate of feather pecking and cannibalism is among free-range hens, and both were recognized problems among laying hen flocks long before modern battery cages came into use. Feather loss may look greater in cages because of hen rubbing against cage walls during the production period. Because of concerns about animal welfare, there's a lot of pressure in the United States and internationally to stop using conventional battery cages. The European Union will ban conventional cages starting in 2012, although larger furnished cages with additional features including perches and nest boxes may be allowed. Germany made this transition in 2010. In 2008, California voters passed a proposition mandating that egg-laying hens have enough room to stretch their wings fully, stand up, and turn around. This can be in cages or cage-free. In 2010, the California governor signed legislation mandating that any eggs sold in the state must have been produced in conditions that meet the California caging requirements. The laws do not take effect until 2015, and there is still some confusion about what the law requires, the writing of specific rules, and who will be responsible for enforcement. Pressure from animal rights activists has also caused large egg buyers to take action. In 2007, for example, Burger King, the world's second largest fast food chain, announced it would begin buying eggs from suppliers that do not confine laying hens in cages. Burger King purchases more than 40 million pounds of eggs a year. In late 2011, McDonald's and Target stopped buying eggs from the nation's fifth largest egg supplier after an undercover video showed hens in filthy cages that were in such disrepair, hens were mangled by broken cage wire. The video showed dead hens decomposing next to live cage mates, along with the mistreatment of hens by workers. So, are laying hens routinely mistreated or not? Are cage systems inhumane? Here's one thing to consider. The mortality rate for hens was about 40% annually in the 1920s and 30s, when egg production was a backyard industry and all hens were free range, according to American Egg Board. Specially designed indoor housing was a significant innovation, allowing controlled feeding and protecting hens from predators and parasite infestations. Mortality dropped to 18%. Then came cage systems, which reduced mortality down to 5%. In 2010, the American Veterinary Management Association released a report on the welfare implications of various kinds of housing. The report concludes consumers need to balance the hen's freedom against exposure to potential hazards, such as disease vectors and cannibalism. Here's a summary from the AVMA showing the trade-offs among different housing systems for laying hens. Some highlights are: the overall mortality rate is better for hens in conventional cages and worse for cage-free and free-range hens. Mortality from feather pecking and cannibalism is less in conventional cages. Hens in conventional and furnished cages are exposed to fewer disease vectors, such as wild birds, in conventional and furnished cages. Ditto for internal parasites. Free-range hens are exposed to the more disease vectors and parasites. Perhaps surprisingly, according to the AVMA, there is less hen hysteria in conventional cages and small to medium furnished cages. Hen hysteria can lead to piling on and smothering of other hens, which is less likely to happen in a conventional cage system. On other hen welfare measures, the ratings are opposite. Conventional cages rate as poor on use of nest boxes, use of perches, and dust bathing behavior. Dust bathing involves tossing and rubbing dust between the feathers to maintain feather and skin condition. Air quality, the presence of dust and ammonia, is best with conventional cages and free-range systems. As AVMA notes, many hen welfare concerns have nothing to do with housing systems. Feather pecking and cannibalism are unpredictable and partly due to genetics. Many of the appalling conditions shown in animal rights videos are caused by human cruelty and management's failure to follow regulations, not because of housing systems. Cage-free and free-range eggs cost more. This husbandry system is labor intensive and feed intake is usually greater, especially in cold wintry months, because the environment is less controlled. That's an acceptable trade-off for consumers concerned about laying hens closely confined in pens. Before making a decision about which eggs to buy, consumers need to weigh the hen's freedom to exercise and perform natural behaviors against exposure to potential hazards, such as disease vectors and large social groups. Economic considerations also come into play. Ultimately, it's all about choice. To learn more about the risk of foodborne illness from different eggs, go to Part 3.